Most people think Generation X is simple, independent, tough, emotionally distant. But that's only what you see. And picture this, it's the late 1970s. You're around 8 years old. You walk home from school, open the door, and the house is completely quiet. No one asks how your day was. No one checks if you're okay. You make your own food, sit alone, wait. And by the mid-1980s, studies estimated that millions of children were regularly coming home to empty houses after school. And when that becomes normal, something begins to change inside the mind. You stop expecting help. You start solving things on your own. You learn to stay quiet, even when something feels overwhelming. And over time, that doesn't just create independence. It creates a different way of thinking. A mind that observes more than it speaks, feels more than it shows, and quietly questions everything, even itself. And this isn't just a generation, it's a psychological pattern, one many people still carry today. Independence is often seen as confidence, but for many, it started as necessity. And imagine being a child who had to figure things out alone, not once, but every day, making food, handling problems, waiting without knowing when someone would return, and over time, the brain adapts. It stops looking outward for support and starts relying inward. And this is how self-reliance forms, not as a choice, but as a response. And in adulthood, this looks like someone who handles everything quietly. They solve problems alone. They don't ask for help easily. And even when things feel heavy, they carry it themselves, not because they want to prove strength, but because depending on others no longer feels natural. And underneath that independence, there's often a quiet distance, a subtle belief that if you rely too much on others, you might end up alone anyway. Now, imagine growing up in a time where emotions were not something you talked about. They were something you controlled. And in many households during that time, conversations weren't about feelings. They were about rules, discipline, consequences. And you learned quickly that reacting emotionally didn't change outcomes. So instead, you adapted. You started processing everything internally, thinking before reacting, containing instead of expressing. And psychologically, this creates a strong internal filter. Emotions are felt deeply, but shown carefully. And in real life, this looks like calmness, the ability to stay composed in stressful situations. But internally, it's not always calm. There's effort, regulation, control, and over time, that control becomes exhausting because feeling everything deeply while showing almost nothing requires more energy than most people realize. When someone spends years handling life alone, solitude stops feeling empty. It starts feeling safe. No expectations, no emotional pressure, no unpredictability, just control. And for many influenced by this mindset, being alone isn't loneliness, it's relief. You can see it in small ways, preferring quiet spaces, needing time alone after social interaction, feeling mentally drained after too much noise. But there's another side to this. The more comfortable solitude becomes, the harder it is to depend on others. And over time, something subtle happens. It becomes difficult to tell whether you're choosing to be alone or simply used to it. Generation X didn't just grow up at home alone. They grew up watching the world shift, from political scandals like Watergate to rising divorce rates, to companies laying off loyal workers without warning. They were told, work hard, follow the rules, everything will be stable. But reality didn't match that promise. And when expectations break repeatedly, trust begins to change. And psychologically, this creates a mindset that relies less on systems and more on personal judgment. And in real life, this looks like questioning authority quietly, not rebelling loudly, but thinking independently. They don't follow titles, they follow competence. But this also comes with pressure, because when nothing feels fully reliable, you become responsible for figuring everything out yourself. From the outside, it looks like logic, careful decisions, thoughtful planning, a practical way of thinking, but internally, it's often much more active than it appears. And when someone grows up in an environment where mistakes have consequences, the brain learns to predict outcomes constantly. What could go wrong? What should I prepare for? And this creates a mind that thinks ahead, sometimes several steps ahead. And in everyday life, this looks like caution, analyzing conversations, replaying decisions. But it also creates mental exhaustion, because the mind doesn't just focus on what's happening, it focuses on everything that might happen. And while this awareness can prevent mistakes, it also makes it very hard to truly relax. When you look at these patterns together, they can be easy to misunderstand. Independence can look like emotional distance. Calmness can seem like detachment. Overthinking can feel like unnecessary complexity. But underneath all of this, there's usually a consistent pattern. A mind that adapted early, learned quietly, and continues to process the world internally. And it's not about being distant. It's about understanding before reacting, even if that understanding comes with silence, self-doubt, or a constant need to think things through. On the surface, everything looks under control. Responsibilities are handled, problems are solved, things get done. But internally, there's often a quiet second layer, a constant evaluation. Was that the right decision? Could this have been better? And this comes from growing up without consistent feedback. When no one is there to guide or validate you, you start relying completely on your own judgment. And when your own judgment becomes your only reference, you begin to question it more. And in real life, this looks like double-checking everything, being careful, sometimes overly careful, not because of weakness, but because everything has always depended on getting it right. When your mind is used to thinking deeply, surface-level conversations can feel incomplete, not wrong, just lacking something. And you might notice this in group settings, people talking, laughing, exchanging small details. And yet, something feels missing, because your mind is looking for meaning, connection, depth. So instead of forcing interaction, you stay quiet, you observe, you listen, not because you don't care, but because shallow conversations don't hold your attention for long. And over time, this creates distance because meaningful conversations are rare, and not everyone is looking for them. Resilience is often seen as strength, and in many ways it is. Generation X learned early how to handle stress, how to keep going, how to stay composed no matter what happens. But resilience doesn't always come from processing emotions. Sometimes it comes from moving past them quickly. And when you grow up without space to fully express what you feel, you learn to keep going instead of pausing. And in real life, this looks like staying calm in difficult moments, recovering quickly, not reacting strongly. But over time, something changes. Emotions become less clear, not gone, just harder to identify, and what looks like strength from the outside can sometimes feel like quiet numbness on the inside. The psychology of Generation X is not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It exists quietly, in the way thoughts are processed, in the way emotions are managed, and in the way the world is observed. It's shaped by experience, not labels, where independence becomes instinct and reflection becomes constant. And maybe the most interesting part is this: many people carry these patterns without ever realizing it, not as a generation, but as a way of thinking. Because sometimes what looks like distance is actually depth, and what feels like silence is often a mind that never really stopped learning how to survive by understanding everything around it.